Imagine this, a world beneath the surface, where light fades and shadows dominate, where every breath is a lifeline and the unknown lurks just beyond reach. For most, the idea of donning heavy, confining underwater gear and venturing into a pitch-black, sediment-choked tunnel would be a nightmare. But for a few daring souls, it's an irresistible call to adventure. Diving has existed for centuries, but it wasn't until the 1950s that recreational diving truly exploded in the United States. Back then, gear was primitive compared to today's technology, and divers were trained to endure what most would fear. Take Murray, a diver trained by the US. His expertise earned in the vast open waters. But today, we're going somewhere far more dangerous. Welcome to the world of cave diving, where the stakes are higher, the risks greater, and every dive could be your last. Nonetheless, he was one of the most experienced and respected divers in the diving club, as many of the other members were weekend warriors with little to no official training, and they all looked up to him. The club's amateur divers were always excited to go into the water with Murray, since he knew so much more than them and could teach them what he knew. Garu. Murray had been contemplating diving Radium Springs for a while, and when he proposed the idea to a fellow club member, Donald Garu, he was anxious to accompany Murray. By mid-1955, Murray and Donald were both experienced cave divers, who had been in some dangerous circumstances over the years. As a result, they were well aware of the risks associated with their chosen sport. They took safety seriously, but they saw danger as part of the alert. Murray and Donald were adrenaline junkies long before the phrase was invented. They also appreciated the companionship and thrill of exploring caves that few, if any, had ever visited before. Decades later, divers and geologists concluded that Radium Springs Cave Complex was 1,500 feet, or 475 meters long, and had an unusual honeycomb structure. However, Murray and Donald had no idea how large it was, how many corridors and rooms it had, how deep it extended, or what unknown offshoots it included in 1955. They were both excited to begin the excursion when they arrived at the cave on Friday morning in the summer of 1955. Murray and Donald were excited about a deep, undiscovered dive, but they also wanted to explore and map as much of the cave as possible. To make the most of their limited time underwater, they decided to separate shortly after entering the cave. This would allow them to cover a bit more ground than if they stuck together. However, it was absolutely problematic in terms of safety, because they wouldn't be able to support one another if something went wrong. But, given the circumstances, it felt like a decent trade-off. Soon after arrival, Murray and Donald began preparing their gear and suiting up. However, it is worth mentioning that their equipment was significantly heavier and bulkier than modern-day diving gear. High-quality commercial diving equipment was not available back then. To save as much money as possible, many divers, like Murray, built their own gear and oxygen tanks out of discarded equipment and odds and ends found at local hardware stores. It was nearing midday when Murray and Donald waded out from the shore into the blue water. When they reached roughly chest depth, they placed their regulators into their mouths, dropped beneath the surface, and began the short descent to the partially officially camouflaged 3-foot cave opening at the bottom of the spring. Before entering the cave, they chose not to secure a safety line at the entrance. In principle, the queue would direct them to the exit if they became lost or experienced a critical equipment failure. Safety lines are especially critical for divers exploring unfamiliar cave systems. This is especially true in sediment-filled caves, where visibility can plummet to almost nil in the blink of an eye. Then, Murray and Donald glanced through the tight entrance into the cave. While their eyes were accustomed to the darkness, they carefully moved their handmade flashlights from side to side to see which way the main corridor ran. At that point, they discovered a heavy layer of sediment on the cave floor. To avoid disturbing and scattering it into the water, they realized they needed to keep their motions to a minimum and swim as near to the top of the main route as possible. They also had to be careful with their fins, kicking them out sideways rather than up and down. This is extremely difficult to do in a narrow, constrained cave tunnel. As they went under a big rock overhang into the main path, the last rays of natural light vanished behind them. The dive was enjoyable and uncomplicated at first, but they gradually swam further into the cave. The water was astonishingly clear, shimmering under the beams of their torches as Murray and Donald waded deeper into the cave. The air inside felt cool, and the sound of dripping water echoed softly off the cavern walls. As they moved forward, their lights illuminated a number of side passages that splintered off from the main tunnel. Each one beckoned with a sense of mystery, but the darkness within made it impossible to determine how far they stretched, or where they led. Some looked accessible, but others seemed narrow and forbidding. Murray and Donald hesitated at a few of these side tunnels, leaning in just enough to catch a glimpse of what lay within. But, with their vision limited by the light and the increasing pressure of the cave's atmosphere, they decided against exploring any further. They'd been in the water for roughly 30 minutes, but it felt much longer to Donald, whose growing unease was hard to ignore. After advancing only about 200 feet, or 60 meters, into the cave, Donald abruptly stopped. His breathing had quickened, and he could feel the unmistakable grip of panic tightening in his chest. His instincts were screaming that something was wrong. He glanced at Murray, trying to steady his nerves, but every inch of him was telling him to turn back. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the oppressive weight of the cave pressed down on him in a way that made it hard to breathe. "I think we should go back," Donald said, his voice strained. "I can't shake this feeling. Something's off." He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the eerie silence that hung in the air, or the way the water seemed to ripple with no apparent cause. Whatever it was, Donald knew that if they ventured any further, the situation could spiral out of control. Donald and Murray exchanged subtle signals beneath the surface of the water, communicating without words. Donald, having already returned from his dive, indicated to Murray that it was time to come back, and suggested that they head out together. However, Murray wasn't ready to call it a day. He felt as though he had hardly scratched the surface of the adventure. No real exploration, no challenges faced. In his mind, the day's effort had been unfulfilling. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd fallen short of achieving what he'd set out to do. His sense of purpose remained unmet, and the call to push further tugged at him. Murray in particular seems to be driven by a need for adventure and fulfillment, despite Donald signaling that it's time to wrap up their exploration and leave together. Murray feels like he hasn't accomplished enough. He feels a deep pull to continue, which suggested that his desire for exploration and challenge might lead him to push beyond safe limits. If we were to continue imagining how the story unfolds, we can assume that Murray's decision to stay longer might result in unforeseen consequences. Given the title Radium Cave Disaster, the cave may have dangers that Murray underestimates, perhaps relating to radium exposure or the structural hazards of an underwater cave. As Murray pushes further into the cave, he might encounter increasing difficulties, limited oxygen, disorienting labyrinths, underwater currents, or perhaps even toxic radium deposits that could pose serious health risks. Donald, likely worried about Murray's extended absence, may be torn between staying safe and re-entering the dangerous cave to rescue his friend. In the end, the disaster part of the title might hint at a tragic or near-fatal conclusion. Murray, blinded by his drive for achievement, could succumb to the cave's dangers. Donald might try to save him but be unable to reach him in time, or the two could find themselves trapped. Whether or not they survive, the story seems to warn about the dangers of overreaching in pursuit of adventure, without understanding or respecting the risks involved. And that's the haunting story of the Radium Cave Disaster. It's a chilling reminder of how curiosity in science, while powerful, can sometimes lead to tragic consequences. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to give this video.
In the summer of 1993, St. Louis was hit by some really unusual and heavy rain. The city faced a season of non-stop rain, leading to one of the worst floods in its history. On one specific day, a sudden and heavy downpour at Cliff Cave Park turned what was meant to be a fun trip into a terrifying nightmare. This is the incredible story of 13-year-old Gary Maha, who found himself in a life-threatening situation and survived against all odds. Gary's troubled life before the flood. Gary Maha was a young teenager caught in a cycle of trouble. At just 13 years old, Gary had begun to make poor choices. He had started hanging out with a problematic crowd, staying out late, and getting into trouble with the police. His mother was deeply concerned about his future. She lived in a tough neighborhood plagued by crime and poverty, and she worried that the environment was negatively influencing Gary. To help steer him back on track, Gary's mother made the difficult decision to send him to St. Joseph's Home for Boys. This was a place designed to help troubled youths like Gary. Although it was a hard choice, she hoped that being in a structured environment would provide him with the guidance he needed. Gary was allowed to come home only every other weekend until his behavior improved. The day of the flood, an unexpected adventure. As Gary began adjusting to life at the boys' home, the Midwest was experiencing unprecedented rainfall. The region was suffering from severe flooding that had caused widespread damage, with many people losing their homes and lives. On one particular day, after a break in the rain, the staff at St. Joseph's Home decided to take the boys on an outing to Cliff Cave Park. Despite road closure signs warning of potential dangers, the group decided to proceed. They were excited about exploring the cave and enjoying the sunny weather. Upon reaching the cave, the boys and their counselors noticed that the cave entrance appeared unaffected by the recent floods. Eager to explore, they ignored the road closure signs and entered the cave. The group consisted of 16 boys aged between 7 to 14, along with 4 counselors. Exploring the cave, a dangerous choice. The cave seemed safe at first. The boys began climbing rocks and exploring the wide entrance. One of the counselors, who was experienced in caving, suggested exploring deeper into the cave. 5 boys, including Gary, volunteered to go further in. They were reassured by the presence of 2 counselors and entered the main tunnel. The cave's main passage was initially wide, but it soon narrowed into a smaller tunnel. The further they went, the more complex the cave became, with numerous side passages branching off. As they ventured deeper, they noticed a small stream at the bottom of the cave, which slowly started rising. The sudden torrential downpour. On that fateful day, a heavy rainstorm began outside while the group was still exploring the cave. Initially, the boys did not realize the gravity of the situation. The water level around their ankles remained fairly steady. However, the situation quickly deteriorated as the storm intensified. Water began pouring in from the cave's ceiling and walls, creating waterfalls and rapidly rising water levels. The boys and counselors were overwhelmed by the sudden influx of water. Panic spread as they tried to make their way back to the cave entrance. The floodwaters surged violently, sweeping them off their feet and pulling them back into the dark, submerged cave. Desperate search and rescue efforts. Outside the cave, the ground was completely soaked and couldn't take in any more water. The extra water quickly filled up sinkholes and low spots, causing the cave to flood much faster than usual. The group outside climbed to higher ground and called 911, hoping for a rescue. Rescue teams arrived in about 30 minutes, but the situation was serious. They found 3 bodies near the cave entrance, caught in debris and trees. This left 4 people still missing inside the cave. As night came, the rescuers kept searching. They checked the riverbanks and cave entrance, worried that some of the missing people might have been carried downstream toward the Mississippi River. Experienced cavers helping with the search didn't think they would find any survivors due to the tough conditions. They faced a significant challenge, searching the Drapery Crawl, a narrow and low passage within the cave. This area is only 2 to 3 feet high and requires crawling on your stomach for up to 45 minutes to get through. The night before, the passage was completely flooded, making it impossible to search. The rescuers had to wait until the next morning for the water to recede enough to access this part of the cave. The search continues, finding Gary. The following morning, with the water levels receding, search teams returned to the cave. They ventured into the Drapery Crawl, a narrow passage that had been completely flooded the previous night. As they moved through the cave, they heard a faint noise. Initially, they thought it was from other searchers, but soon they recognized it as a small, desperate voice. Gary Maha's voice, calling from the darkness, guided rescuers to him. He was found in a small, cramped chamber, standing on a narrow ledge just a few inches wide. The ledge was barely big enough for him to stand on, with cold water receding below him. If he had lost his balance, he would have faced certain death from hypothermia long before being rescued. The miraculous rescue and aftermath. The rescuers carefully brought Gary out of the cave after he'd been trapped in the dark and cold for nearly 24 hours. Despite the scary and tough situation, Gary was strong and thankful to be rescued. Gary's survival was a rare bit of good news in an otherwise tragic event. Unfortunately, the other 6 people who went into the cave that day did not make it. Gary's story reminds us of how important it is to follow safety warnings, especially when the weather is bad. It shows how fragile life can be and why we need to be careful on every adventure. After Gary was rescued, his mother was incredibly relieved and grateful to have him back. Even though the situation was very hard, she was so happy that Gary had survived. She couldn't stand the thought of losing him and wanted to keep him safe and close. This experience made her realize how precious life is and how important it is to appreciate every moment with the people we love. Gary Maha's story teaches us about the importance of staying safe and paying attention to warnings. Tell us in the comments section below. If Gary Maha's story moved you and you found it informative, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of courage, survival, and vital lessons. Remember to always prioritize safety in all situations to protect yourself and others.
What would you do if a beautiful day turns into a nightmare? Meet the Weltner family, a lively clan bound by their shared love for adventure. The Weltners aren't your average suburban family. They're explorers at heart, always seeking the next thrilling journey. Today's plan: a daring exploration of the Crooked Swamp Cave system, a place of raw, untouched beauty. This cave, a labyrinth of ancient tunnels and chambers, is shrouded in mystery and allure. It's a siren calling out to those with a thirst for adventure, just like our Weltner family. The Crooked Swamp Cave is a majestic sight, a vivid tapestry of stalactites and stalagmites, a testament to the power of nature's artistry. It's a place that promises awe and wonder, a paradise for the adventurers at heart. But as the Weltner family set off on their journey, filled with excitement and anticipation, they were oblivious to what the day had in store for them. Little did they know, the day held an unexpected turn: the descent into darkness. As they descended into the cave, the world outside seemed to fade away. The familiar sounds of the forest were replaced by the echo of their own footsteps. The light from the sun was replaced by the cool, eerie glow of their headlamps against the damp cave walls. They found themselves in a completely different world, a subterranean wonderland that had remained unchanged for thousands of years. The cave was a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, each one more awe-inspiring than the last. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like icicles, while stalagmites rose from the floor like ancient monuments. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of earth and stone. The Weltner family was captivated by the beauty of the cave. Their eyes sparkled with curiosity and wonder as they moved deeper into the belly of the earth. Every corner turned, every chamber entered was a new adventure, a new discovery. In the midst of this wonderland, a particular narrow tunnel caught Donald's attention. It was barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, and it disappeared into the darkness, its end unknown. Something about this tunnel intrigued Donald. Perhaps it was the promise of unexplored territory. Whatever it was, it beckoned him. He felt a pull, an irresistible urge to see where it led. And so, with a sense of excitement and a touch of apprehension, Donald decided to explore this narrow tunnel. He adjusted his headlamp, took a deep breath, and squeezed himself into the tight passage. The rest of the family watched as it disappeared into the darkness, their anticipation tinged with a hint of worry. Donald, eager to explore, ventured into the narrow tunnel, oblivious of the ordeal that lay ahead. The nightmare unfolds. Donald Weltner, the adventurous patriarch, found himself ensnared in the cave's unforgiving clutches. As they ventured deeper into the earth's belly, the family came upon a narrow tunnel. Donald, driven by his innate curiosity, decided to explore it. However, halfway through, the tunnel's tight confines began to close in on him. Despite his attempts to wiggle free, Donald found himself firmly lodged within the Earth's cold, unyielding grip. His family, initially amused by the situation, soon realized the gravity of what was unfolding before their eyes. Donald's attempts to free himself became increasingly frantic. His hands clawed at the rocky surface, seeking a hold that would give him the leverage he needed. His breaths came in ragged gasps, the suffocating tightness of the tunnel pressing against his chest. His family watched on helplessly. their hearts pounding in sync with his labored breaths. The once inviting cave had turned into an unforgiving prison, its cold, dark tunnels echoing their growing panic. Donald's wife and children clustered around the entrance of the tunnel, their faces pale and their eyes filled with fear. Their love, their unity, and their determination were the only lights in the pitch-black darkness. The nightmare had unfolded, and it was up to them to turn the tide. With each passing minute, the situation became graver. The family's plight took on a new level of urgency. Donald, trapped like a bug in amber, was entombed in the belly of the Crooked Swamp cave system, his lifeline to the outside world precariously thin. The family rallied around the crisis. Every second was a hammer blow to their collective heart, each tick of the clock echoing through the cavernous darkness. The sweet light of day was a distant memory, replaced by the oppressive weight of the earth overhead. Their attempts to free Donald were desperate, frantic. Hands already raw and bleeding clawed at the unforgiving stone. The cave, once a source of adventure and wonder, was now a monstrous adversary, swallowing their hopes with its cold, indifferent jaws. Bravery and fear intertwined as they struggled against the clock. The cave's chilling breath seemed to whisper cruel promises to them, each one a chilling reminder of their daunting predicament. But they refused to be cowed. They were a family, bound by love and a shared determination. They would not let this cave claim one of their own. Their struggle was a testament to human resilience, a testament to the power of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. The cave's oppressive darkness was met with the unyielding light of their resolve. They had become a single unit, their actions harmonized in their singular goal: to free Donald. Time, however, was a relentless opponent. With each passing hour, the narrow confines of the cave seemed to squeeze tighter, the air growing thinner. The cave was now a ticking time bomb, its echoes a haunting countdown. Their efforts were met with little success. The cave was unyielding, its grip on Donald unwavering. The family's strength waned, their energy sapped by relentless struggle. The cave's cold indifference was a stark contrast to the warmth of their desperation. The cave was a labyrinth, its winding tunnels a maze of uncertainty. Every attempt to maneuver Donald free was met with a new obstacle, a new challenge. The cave was a merciless puzzle, its solution hidden in the shadows. But they did not give up. They could not give up. They were a family, and families do not abandon their own. They fought, they struggled, they persevered. Yet, as the hours ticked by, hope seemed to dwindle. The race against time was on, and was a race they could not afford to lose. They knew they had to press on, to fight, to hope, because in the heart of the Crooked Swamp cave system, hope was all they had left. Finally, after hours of struggle, Donald was freed. The air, once filled with a deafening silence and gut-wrenching uncertainty, was now punctuated with sighs of relief and tears of joy. Donald, weak but safe, emerged from the narrow jaws of the Crooked Swamp cave, leaving behind the darkness that held him captive. He was back in the arms of his family, the warmth of their embrace melting away the cold fear that had gripped them all. The reunion was emotional, a whirl of tear-streaked faces, choked laughter, and whispers of gratitude. Their adventure had taken a turn they had never imagined. It was as if they had been caught in a tempest, tossed around by the ferocious waves of fear, hope, despair, and relief. But they had sailed through it, not as an individual, but as a unit, as a family. In the aftermath of the incident, the family found themselves irrevocably changed. They had peered into the face of danger and emerged stronger, their bonds fortified. Their perspective on adventure had been forever altered. The thrill of the unknown, the joy of discovery, had been tarnished with the stark reality of the risks involved. The Crooked Swamp Cave incident was a grim reminder that adventure was not always about excitement and joy, but also about survival and resilience. Yet, they did not let the incident clip their wings completely. It did, however, teach them to tread more carefully, to respect the whims of nature, to be better prepared for the unexpected. They continued to seek adventures, albeit with a newfound wisdom and cautiousness. The incident had shaken them, but it also made them realize their strength, their grit, their ability to weather storms together. The experience had left an indelible mark on their lives, shaping their future adventures. The Crooked Swamp Cave, once a symbol of thrilling mystery, was now a monument of their survival, a testament to their courage and resilience. It was a story they would carry with them, a story of how a family outing turned into a test of their mettle, a story that was etched not just in their memories, but in their very beings. They had started the day as adventurers, but ended it as survivors. A beautiful day had indeed turned into a nightmare, but they had weathered it together as a family. This was their story, their triumph over adversity, and it was the story that made them realize the true essence of adventure. It was not just about exploring the world outside, but also about discovering the strength within.
Have you ever wondered what could go so wrong in a simple diving trip that it could turn into a fatal tragedy? Today, we will reveal the heartbreaking story of Richard and Denisio, two friends whose adventurous spirits led them into a cave they could never escape. This is the Richard and Denisio tragedy explained. Richard and Denisio were longtime friends who shared a passion for diving. The love for adventure and exploration often brought them to various underwater caves. Both were experienced divers, but their eagerness to push their limits would ultimately cost them dearly. They're known in the diving community as skilled yet bold, often tackling dives others would avoid. Their confidence sometimes made them overlook critical safety measures, believing their experience could get them through any situation. This time, their confidence will be tested beyond their limits. On July 19, 2014, Richard and Denisio, along with the two other friends, decided to explore the Cove del Arase cave. Known for its dangerous structure and lack of exploration, the cave was a tempting challenge for the thrill seekers. As they dived deeper into the cave, the group faced unexpected difficulties that would soon spiral out of control. Their initial excitement soon turned into a struggle for survival as the reality of the cave's dangers set in. One of the crucial errors made by Richard and Denisio was forgetting their guideline rope. This rope is vital for divers as it helps them navigate back to the entrance in poor visibility conditions. Without it, they were left vulnerable in the dark, silt-filled cave, making it almost impossible to find their way back. This oversight was a small mistake that turned catastrophic as the dive progressed. Their confidence blinded them to the importance of the simple safety measure, a decision that would have grave consequences. As they ventured deeper, the lack of a guideline would become their greatest challenge. Cove del Arase cave was notorious for its treacherous conditions. The cave's soft clay walls and silty floor could easily be disturbed, reducing visibility to zero. Even experienced divers could lose their way in such an environment. Additionally, the cave structure was complex and unfamiliar, adding to the risk. The cave's remote location also meant that rescue efforts would be challenging and slow. Divers often face unexpected currents and tight passages that could trap them. The cave's dangers were known, but Richard and Denisio's adventurous spirit pushed them to explore it despite the risk. As Richard and Denisio ventured deeper into the cave, their fins disturbed the silt on the floor, creating a cloud that enveloped them in darkness. Realizing the danger, they decided to turn back, but it was too late. The silt had reduced their visibility to nothing, and without guideline rope, they were lost. The more they moved, the worse the visibility became. Richard and Denisio grew desperate as they tried to find the cave's entrance. They couldn't see and felt more scared. They knew they had little air and needed to get out fast. Every time they tried to move, they got nowhere. Their hearts beat fast and they used up more air quickly. Each minute felt very long as they searched blindly for an exit. The quiet cave, broken only by their heavy breaths, reminding them of the danger. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, Dionisio noticed a small ray of light. Believing it could be their way out, they swarmed towards it. The light led them to a narrow crack in the cave wall, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. This glimmer of hope gave them the strength to keep fighting. They struggled through the tight passage, each movement bringing a mix of pain and relief. The thought of fresh air and sunlight pushed them onward, despite their exhaustion. This ray of light was their lifeline, a small miracle in a desperate situation. The crack led them to an air pocket in a parallel cave. Exhausted and low on air, Richard and Dionisio removed their equipment and breathed in the precious air. They were safe for a moment, but they knew their ordeal was far from over. They had to wait for rescue, hoping their friends had called for help. They used the time to regain some strength, only that every breath they took was precious. The air pocket gave them a fighting chance, but the clock was ticking. Meanwhile, their friends on the surface had alerted emergency services. Spain's Civil Guard quickly organized a rescue operation. Divers, marine biologists, and underwater photographers joined forces to find Richard and Dionisio. The rescue was challenging, but the team was determined to save them. The operation was a race against time, with rescuers battling the same conditions that trapped the divers. The rescue team worked tirelessly, knowing that every minute counted. Their efforts was a testament to a human determination and the will to save lives despite the overwhelming odds. Richard and Dionisio faced another threat: carbon dioxide poisoning. As they breathed, the air in the pocket was replaced with carbon dioxide, slowly poisoning them. Their bodies grew weaker with each passing moment, and their minds clouded with confusion and fear. They knew they were running out of time, but they had a light of hope. Despite their best efforts, Richard succumbed to carbon dioxide poisoning. Dionisio, alone and barely able to stay conscious, clung to life. His friend's lifeless body floated beside him, a grim reminder of their dire situation. Dionisio's will to survive kept him going, but he knew time was running out. Thank you for joining us in uncovering the tragic story of Richard and Dionisio. This story is a powerful reminder of the importance of safety and preparation in all our adventures. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others. Remember to subscribe to our channel for more stories and lessons that inspire and educate.